Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Accuracy in America, brought to you by Accuracy in Academia. Don Irvine, your host, joined by my co-host, Brian McNichol.
Good morning, everybody.
You're still in charge of writing that opening.
Yeah, I got to get that put on list. Do opening.
It's okay. I mean, it's perfectly fine, right? It's just
Yeah.
for years. I mean, we've been doing this a long time, and then we've had this list of growing words and everything like that. So, yeah. Anyway,
Pro tariff, Putin worshiping, fascist, racists. There we go.
yeah. Well, things will pop up. They won't stay quiet for long, and all. Okay. Well, weather report. I just want to throw in here that I think we're going to get some rain based on. I don't know. Look. So I've got two apps on my phone. One is like the standard Apple weather app, which is like, and the other one is AccuWeather, uh, which is I think is much better. But the Apple one is the one that comes up most often, and it's showing like the next 5 days there's a good chance of rain, which
Yeah.
I guess is coming in from these other storms that are out there. But we haven't had a lot of rain. I kind of gauge this to by my lawn. I'm like, look, I'm at April 3rd, haven't had to cut the grass yet, and I'm like, oh, it's getting close. But if we get 4 or 5 days of rain, that grass is going to have to get cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see it getting bushy here. And it's wet out there now. I guess it sprinkled some, but
Yeah. When I left the house this morning, I'm like, okay, so it's drizzly. It's stage one or whatever before we start getting the heavy stuff. I'm like, okay, plan my
big
shopping.
storms in the middle of the country. They told the people in Memphis that this could be generational flooding, but I think it went past them and it rained good and hard, but I don't think they got generational flooding. But so it's headed here. And one of the things that's starting to happen. I mean, it started years ago, but it's getting really pronounced now. Is like so in Shreveport they have something called the Barksdale bubble, right? So Shreveport is west of Barksdale, right? It's on the west. Shreveport's on the west side of the river, and Bossier is where Barksdale is on the east, right? But when storms come across, they skip Barksdale, right? The storms break up and go past, and so that if you're at Barksdale or anywhere west of it, your rain patterns are different from everybody else's because and they talk about this and they every time it happens, somebody puts the weather map up and you can see the Barksdale bubble appearing, right? Well, it started to kind of happen here, especially where I live. So that we had two snowstorms this year, and Reston was the lowest, got the least amount of snow in both storms. And that shouldn't, parts of this county, parts of Fairfax County are basically at sea level. Parts of Montgomery County are pretty close to sea level. Right? We're about 415 or 20 feet up. We should be getting more snow than the Mount Vernon area, right? The Route 1 corridor, people that know the DC area, south of the city, but we're not. They're getting considerably more snow, rain, wind, and stuff. So there may be a Dulles bubble too, right? We're protected. We're about the same place in relation to Dulles as most of Shreveport is in relation to Barksdale. So maybe I mean, I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff, but it may be something about these airports that are doing something to the storm patterns, how the storms cross.
Yeah, you mentioned here too. You're talking about generational storm. I mean, it's we're seeing a lot more in terms of at least news reporting. I want to couch that in offense, say it is news reporting. Where they talk about the once in 100 year, or once in 1,000 year floods or storms or whatever getting more severe. I mean, what it does, for one thing, is it definitely is planting a seed, I think, on a lot of people's minds that there are parts of the country that are just they're getting walloped by these big storms that were not as common as they used to be.
Yeah. Well, I think it's media perception. I think I don't know that there's a big change in weather patterns. There's a big change in how we cover it and talk about it, because it obviously serves a political agenda for the leftists in the media.
And they're news stories. I mean, it's you have news time to fill. I mean, they are looking for the most sensational types of things
Right.
they can cover. So therefore, you do that, and it's the more dramatic it can be, the better. I mean, if people get trapped in their cars, if there's a lot, if people have got to whip out the little rowboats to rescue, or little motorboats and things like that to rescue. You see people on the roofs of a house or stuck in a tree or whatever. Those things are they're great for news,
Yeah,
right?
because it's a big problem. Is like you have a bunch of networks now that are 24-hour news, right? Or so they say.
Right.
But there's really not 24 hours worth of news, right? So what do you do? How do you fill that? Because what ends up happening a lot of times is they have a story in the morning that broke some news, right? They have the average amount of news that any newspaper or whatever has, but then that's the story of the day, and all they'll have endless discussion panels and all that kind of stuff to just rehash that story, right? Other stories may be gliding by unnoticed, but they've got a formula, and it's an easy formula, and they like setting up these like Scott Jennings fighting all these people on CNN, and then the highlight moments of when they smack each other down and all this kind of stuff, right? That's what's passing for TV and entertainment for a lot of America today.
It does seem like it's Scott Jennings against the world.
It does. He's pretty good at like 5-on-1. Just
Yeah, no, he takes it. I mean, he knows exactly how to deal with these people.
Yep.
It's not these mealy mouthed, conservatives kind of thing like that get pushed back and then will just take all those hits. He pushes back, and
He's also one of the things that's really funny is, he has realized that, because you see it in enough clips, right? This is how they're going to do it. So, some leftist on there is arguing some point, assiduously claiming, and they put him up in the corner, right? His reaction up in the corner. So he's learned to play to that camera, right? He knows that camera is watching him to do it.
Yeah.
People don't realize like how big a part of TV those expressions are, right? Because you can't, you cannot, like you say, what, why am I can sit around with my family and crack them up all day. Why can't I go on TV and make people laugh, right? Well, part of it is your family gets all the nuance of what you said. They know all the backstories. Your thing does not, it could be funny for reasons that a TV or live audience wouldn't know, right? But your family knows the backstory. That's very funny, right? But in front of an audience, it's different, and that's part of what's going on there. You don't, you just don't connect on TV, right? It doesn't all come out.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction a lot of times gets a lot more attention than what was said beforehand. It's seeing how people react to what has been said tends to play up bigger. So, yeah, I mean, with all this technology and the way that they're trying to shape the news and everything like that, I mean, look, so Jennings is probably the best thing CNN's got going, right?
Right, because you all got to watch. Even the people who hate him got to watch.
Yeah. So he's done a good job over there. It's kind of a thankless task, but I think he relishes.
Well, it's not all that thankless. He actually signed a contract recently.
Well, yeah, I mean,
the gratitude that I would ever need.
No. I mean, he's they're paid for it, but I mean, you've got it. You're just having these daily battles.
Yeah,
it's kind of wearing. I mean,
it is. It is.
Can go in there and do that on occasion. I mean, so the financial remuneration is always good, but it's kind of. I mean, look, I mean, if you were signed for a contract on The View and you got to face those ladies and stuff like that, it's like, ugh.
It'd be fun for a while, and then
at first it's okay.
What garbage are they going to come up with today?
Yeah. At first it's okay, but and I can think like with the Elizabeth Hasselbeck, I think for a long time, she was okay with it, and she didn't really fight super hard for things, but I think she kind of saw how things were going, that that Whoopi and Joy Behar, Sunny House, they were just ramping it up and increasing everything, and it's no longer even remotely enjoyable at that stretch. It's like, so
Right.
they keep plopping in different people to try to find somebody who's willing to do battle. And people will take that paycheck for a while, but after a while, they're like,
Yeah, I think the problem is like they don't really know what they want, because they
yeah,
don't want a Scott Jennings. They don't want somebody
right,
to come in there and actually win the fights. They want you to sort of lose valiantly, and sort of put up things that they can slap down easily. And so you're saying be sort of smart, be smart enough to see where these go, but not smart enough to, overpower our people we want to win. Right.
right. I mean, I think it's I'm sure it's kind of the unwritten rule there is, do not embarrass your liberal
Right.
co-host.
Exactly.
You
And
go up,
Joy Behar can say anything she wants to you, and
right,
there's nothing you can do.
right, yeah,
Right?
you
She's completely free to. I mean, they clap back at Whoopi a little bit, right? Every
right,
once in a while, Whoopi has to take a day off or whatever, but Joy is free to swing from the heels, and
right,
it
yeah,
doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be true or genuine. She can misrepresent facts. She can outright lie. They do not care.
yeah. Even if you dislike Whoopi, you've got to dislike Joy Behar even more. She's the
Yeah,
worst. That's just I don't know what keeps that show running.
yeah,
To be
yeah. It's
honest,
pretty funny.
that's amazing in and of itself, just to see that show just keep going. Um, Overseas, before we get to come here domestically, which will also, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. So I guess, Trump is somewhat criticized Putin for dragging his heels on this, because we were talking a few weeks ago about, how close we were to a ceasefire agreement and everything like that. But we've also talked about, what's the incentive for Putin? He has the card. The advantage is his, in terms of what he's been able to do, and how much more does he, what does he really gain from a ceasefire per se? Zelensky would gain more out of seeing the bleeding stopped. So Trump doesn't seem to be too happy with that. But I don't really see a whole lot of pushback from Trump on this, against Putin. I mean, I guess he'll issue this criticism, but it hasn't been like typical Trump criticism of other people that he has in the past. And he hasn't really popped off on social media like he has with other people in the past. I think he wants that relationship, and
Well, we have a ton of sanctions on them, right? Already, we've done everything we could to basically cut them off from the world, except for the truly hostile actors that we can't cut them off from: North Korea, China, Iran, right? So he holds the territory. You want to dislodge him from that territory, you're running right up against the possibility of a nuclear conflict. Over 200 miles of mud in eastern Ukraine, which I don't think many people see that as a worthwhile bargain. And so what Trump is looking for is a leverage point. Now he's starting to get it organized with the energy, right? If you see energy come online, what do you call it? Drill baby drill actually start to happening, and you can already see gas prices are falling. They're below where Trump took office, and they'll probably continue to fall a pretty good bit. He's got production ramping up domestically and globally. The OPEC countries have agreed to ramp up production, so prices will fall any farther. What does that mean to Russia? Russia, almost all their income is selling oil and so forth on the world market, energy on the world market. So if you can lower the price of energy, you really hurt Russia financially. So if he gets to the point where he can do that, then he has some leverage that he can really work with, right? Because like right now, I mean, Trump's a deal maker, so he's assessing the leverage, like who's got what, and we don't really have a lot of cards with Putin. People do not understand like how stupid the Biden administration was in all this, and just letting them, amass all those troops on the border and then attack. I mean, we didn't do anything. That was the time to do something. That was the time to, arm to the teeth and run to the ramparts and all that kind of stuff. Now, they're there, right? The lines haven't moved in that war in 3 years, right? It's basically the first few weeks sort of set it up like it is now, and they've been fighting in those spots basically since. So, what are you going to do? What is it? How do we get them out of there? I think they're working on that, but I honestly don't think they have the answer yet.
Yeah, that's definitely what it seems like. What about Israel? I mean, we talked about how Israel has gone on the offensive, and they've ramped up the pressure on Hamas. And I noticed that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day saying that there are cracks in Hamas. They're
right.
losing.
Hamas starting to turn on each other. They people on that side executed some of the Hamas leaders the other day. So it's starting to cost the people their lives. The people of Gaza have decided that Hamas is indeed the problem, and they're thinking, we could get rid of Hamas, the bombing might stop, right? So they're trying to show that we don't want this on us anymore. And it's a positive development for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's quite a turnaround. I mean, this is getting closer to achieving Israel's goals with relation to Hamas, and to see that they're now chinks in the armor, so to speak, is a good sign that maybe this is it. Maybe this push and will actually get Hamas out of there and eliminate them from the area, if not just completely from the world map. But we'll wait and see how that goes. But it's the most progress against Hamas and I can ever remember in terms of.
There's never been progress like this.
Yeah,
like you've got an opportunity in the Gaza for the first time in our lifetimes to really remake it into something useful, as opposed to a source of unrest in the world.
All right. So the big news yesterday that is spilling over today and will probably dominate the news for a while are the sweeping tariffs that President Trump announced yesterday. I know when I checked about an hour ago, I think the stock market was down close to 1,400 points. I don't know what the current reading is. Yeah, 1414. So it hasn't changed much.
Yeah, I when I was a kid, I used to think about, I want the job of being the guy who writes the story when the stock market closes every day that explains the results. Stock market went up today as investors were encouraged by X, Y, and Z. That X, Y, and Z is whatever, right? So, but in this case, it probably is tied to the news. The investors get spooked by things like this. They don't, change is always bad in their world, right? They understand the present. They don't really understand the future. But yeah, it's an immediate reaction, and it'll be reversed as time goes on, because it's not the fundamentals of the economy are going to change for the better as time goes on. So it's not like something that you'll be enduring for a long time.
Yeah, in relation to the market too. I mean, there's
also this thing, you got to get all that. There's a lot of what was in the market was public money, right? It was Inflation Reduction Act money, and Biden's 3 big spending bills. There were more than $1 trillion each. So Trump's trying to run the economy on private money, not public money, which is the healthy or sustainable way to do it. And so, converting one to the other, it's like, Social Security, right? We really would be way better off if we privatize that, right? The government system's going broke. There's you can't really build wealth in that, and you just get enough money to survive when you're old. Whereas if you had a private system, you could throw in more and you could be making a lot on investments. When you die, your family gets them. So each generation gets a little richer. So, or starts out in a little better shape. Somebody may squander it or whatever, but it's the same type of deal. It's like, there's going to be some friction when it starts, right? The reason that we haven't privatized Social Security is that the transition costs are prohibitive. And what we're living through now is the transition costs from a economy that's paid for by income tax and that type of thing to one where it's paid for by tariffs and fees.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was going to say on the market too, is that these are typical kind of almost the spooky knee-jerk reactions that you get on big news, where there's
Yeah.
because once again it's uncertainty about how exactly if and the stock market does not like uncertainty. If there's anything that that they'll drive the market down, will be this. So I was curious, and I was as I was scrolling through some various stocks, anything from banking to retail. This was showing how the market was judging each individual company, the publicly held company, based on what they believe to be its reliance on China and other sources that were getting, countries that were going to get hit with some big tariffs. So, like Dick's Sporting Goods, I think it dropped.
Couldn't happen to more deserving company, by the way. And if I do not shop there. I do not give them money. And I have some sporting goods needs, right? I have to buy some sporting goods, but not from them, not ever.
Yeah,
not one day.
I think they were. Let me see something. I don't know if I think they were down like 30 points. I mean, it was a good sizable
Bankruptcy
drop.
would be better.
Well, they're still doing pretty well otherwise, but it's just the China ties or the non-China ties. A TJ Maxx is actually going the other direction. Costco is going in the other direction. Walmart's kind of on the same level. But if you're FedEx or UPS, are getting hurt. Chip companies, the Magnificent Seven, they're still they're getting hit. So it just depends upon what the market is trying to figure out. Who has reliance on this, and you just see really how globalized the economy can be. Do people realize that their cosmetics, a lot of stuff they use in cosmetics comes in from overseas. I don't know that people have thought about this, but Wall Street is surely looking at it and saying, if these tariffs stick, then the profits of these companies will be affected, because their costs are going up and they can't raise their prices that much to compensate for that in most cases. So
Thank you, because you read the internet, right, and it's like everyone, well, they put a 10% tariff, that means the cost is going up 10%. Well, no, it does not, right? Yeah, and mysteriously the same people who tell you that, when you want to raise corporate taxes, don't believe that principle, right? Oh no, what are you talking about? Those corporations need to pay. It's like, well, how do you think the corporation handles that? Where do they get that money? They get it from you, right? Corporations do have to respond to that type of thing, right? Because there's no other way around it. But in China, you're talking about like cosmetics. What is it we get from China that we can't get elsewhere, right? If China doesn't want to play ball, what do? Right? We find another source or we make it ourselves, right? That's not rare earth metals. That's not things we can't come up with, so the ones that are critical are the things that depend on those metals, the microprocessors, the windmills, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was saying this morning, I heard on the news that, for example, not something that doesn't affect the average American, but like luxury goods. So like they said, a Rolex watch could increase in price by 30%. Okay, all right. I don't think the average American is buying a Rolex watch. Okay,
right? Who cares? Enjoy your,
If you can do that, fine.
Right. If they go up 30% and they lose business, guess what? They will figure out a way to make those watches not be 30% higher, right?
Right. I mean,
market forces keep working. They don't stop working, when you say the word tariff.
Well, the thing is that since Trump took office, I mean, he's already put tariffs into effect, right? Mm-hmm. And the result so far, as I can see, has really been that the manufacturers in these countries, they have actually been working with their suppliers here in the United States, the people in the United States, the retailers or whatever companies, to try to figure out a way to mitigate the effect of those tariffs. So they've either been trying to come up with a cheaper way to make the product, or they have lowered they've lowered their profit, or some of that has been that I guess they call it reshoring, whatever, but they've moved some production. Some of the stuff requires a bigger timeline. I mean, I think there are people out there who did not believe that Trump would do anything quite so widespread, and so, and I think that's part of the market's reaction is like they were expecting tariffs because Trump has been talking tariffs for months. He talked tariffs in his campaign. This is nothing new in the bigger sense of the picture, but we just didn't know exactly how he was going to levy them, when and who, and all these kinds of things. So they're out there. They're not really reciprocal. He's just going out there. They've identified all these countries and places.
Well, they're worse against the countries that are worse against us. So in that sense, they are reciprocal. They're right sized, so to speak.
Apparently, there's some quirky things in there where it's a little bit questionable about. Sometimes I wonder about the data that the administration has received. That the World Bank or whatever, or if they come out and they say, this little island is producing this, and yet, I think it's Australia. They've got a couple of little external territories, and they're being tariffed, but there's hardly any trade there. And I think one of them doesn't really have any residents. So it's kind of, just quirky little things like this. Like, okay, what do we tell anybody to tariff on? I don't know. There's always going to be little oddities, along the way, I think, with regard to that. But yeah, and it's, even though Trump is basically kind of signaled that these are going to affect, he's not going to wait for negotiations and pull them back or whatever. I think he is sending that other signal that, okay, I'm serious about this, and if you want to see these tariffs removed or reduced, let's talk. We need to talk and find a more.
Canada and Mexico are already talking.
Yeah,
they're already, hey, we'll drop everything you wanted us to drop if you'll just drop this.
Yeah, right? I mean, and they've been, and Canada and Mexico have been acting like that for more than 2 months. They have been reacting to the various tariffs for the last couple.
First, they wanted to mouth off, and especially like they got the new PM in Canada, he wanted to run his mouth. Well, now it's like, okay, it's really here. This is really about to happen to your country, and oh no, well, let's have another conversation.
So I thought there was a funny article in the Journal the other day about Canadians. Canadians have, unlike the Mexicans, I think the Canadians have had a more visceral reaction to all of this trade war kind of stuff like that. And so they have they started a elbows up campaign from the old Gordie Howe days, and so they have that, and they're dumping American products off the retail shelves. They're not taking vacations to the U.S. If they own homes in the U.S., they're going to put them on the market. They're having some of these overreactions to what's going on there. I mean, they'll wind up becoming very isolationist in the long run if they keep this up.
Yeah, which they won't.
Yeah, but so it's kind of funny to see them react like that. I am a little concerned, or just curious maybe about this battle, this war of the words and the tariff with Canada, as to whether or not how much of this affects the future election that has been called for, or the end of this month, I think, because
they called a snap because he thinks he can win now.
Right.
So they think if it goes to October, right? What are they telling you there? They're telling you that if it goes to October, like it was going to originally, right, that the policies will have shown their mettle by then, right? They will have been proven successful, and Poilievre would win.
Yeah,
right? And it's being done now to protect the liberals.
Yeah, right. And Carney and Carney's different than Trudeau, right? I mean, he's in the sense
he's worse.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's like this is not improving anything in Canada, but he is leveraging the anti-American sentiment with the tariffs to his advantage right now. And you're right. I mean, calling a snap election is kind of their little window of time to say, we have this time where we think we can do this, and we can beat the conservatives right now, because otherwise, if the policies actually work, then we're going to be behind the 8 ball, and we won't be able to win at all. So, but right now they're talking it up. At least on the surface, it works. But didn't Theresa May? I mean, didn't she want?
Yeah.
She thought she had it. She all had it in the bag. What happened?
Yeah, you got drugged.
So you better watch out what you wish for. That's
Yeah.
Politics. It's especially when you're in a country. When you're in these countries that have these parliamentary systems. That is
Right.
just such a
That's what
wild.
I'll tell you what. One of the things that's really been exposed by all this is the stark disadvantages of parliamentary systems, right? Where you're not really electing the leader, right? The leader's picked by the poobahs, right? And it's like the Democrats, that's essentially what they do, right? So it becomes an argument that Americans understand as left versus right? Because the Democrats pick like these guys do, right? It's basically like they said, Bernie, you can't run against Hillary. Then Hillary goes out and loses 22 of the last 25 primaries. Can I run now? No, too late, And then, they said they cleared the field for Joe. Then they knocked Joe out and put in Harris. Like, do the voters ever get to pick this, right? For no primaries for Joe, right? Joe got it automatically, and then it was taken away from Joe automatically and given to Harris automatically, right? So no voters didn't participate in any of that. So it's very much like Democrats operate, but, so they all like parliamentary system. It's also, you see, they can't, you can't like Germany, they can't form a coalition, right? They're stuck with this coalition, right? Because that's not what the voters, the voters preferred the conservative party, right? The right-leaning party. But the other parties had enough to be able to join together and block out the people who won the election, right? So it's like, at least we get the people we vote for, for better or for worse, we actually get to pick the people.
Right. And we have been very critical of the parliamentary system on this program. We have
absolutely
made no bones about what we thought the flaws of the system is. And Bob is chiming in here.
Yeah. Right. That's right.
Right. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping for that because it just Trump calls this a disturbance kind of thing like that, and
he calls the economic stress that it caused a disturbance. That causes a disturbance.
Right.
He didn't call the tariffs a disturbance. I think his plan is to move us from paying for our government with income taxes to paying for it like this. For better or worse, it kind of makes it's kind of the same as a national sales tax, right? Because it doesn't matter if you don't buy Chinese goods, you don't buy toys or whatever they sell, that it doesn't matter what the tariff is from China, right? But if you buy Chinese goods, then it does.
Yeah, one of my questions too is that because I haven't looked at the numbers deeply enough, but Trump talks about how much money the tariffs would bring the U.S. and we're going to make America wealthy again. How much of that have they calculated in terms of if a lot of these costs get passed on to the consumer, what if consumer demand drops? Will not won't tariff income drop as well, and you won't bring in as much as you thought you had, and so it's one of these things where
prices go up 10% and your taxes go down 20%. You're in pretty good shape, right?
Well, depends.
It should be, right? I think that's his thing. People keep saying it's temporary to force concessions, and a lot of it is that's absolutely what he's going to do with Mexico and Canada. He's going to they're going to make the concessions, and then he's going to say, okay, you're still on the 10% across the board, but you're off of everything else, right? He may even give them a cut on that, right? If they act right, but he's not you're not going to have a advantageous trade deal with us anymore, right? Where if you have access to our markets, we're going to have access to yours. That's what's coming. If you want to charge a bunch for access to yours, we're going to charge a bunch for access to ours. I think you'll end up seeing a lot less protectionism in the world. I think people will say, okay, yeah, they're the big customer has spoken, and we better get in line.
Yeah, I mean, I think that will, we have to wait and see how this actually rolls out and plays out. But Trump has basically, he has sent this huge warning shot, the shot across the bow, saying, "Here it is. This is
Yeah,
what I promised." I mean, the thing about Trump in this term, I mean, he has just going ahead and just saying, "I'm blowing my entire wad right now." I
right,
mean, I talked about these things on the campaign trail, and
right.
I am going to at least enact these things now. How they work out, I do not, I don't know for sure, because there isn't a
No, you never
surety.
know for sure. That's right.
Yeah, but I'm going to go ahead and put them in place, because that's part of the promise I made, is that I'm going to go ahead and do this. And it's a mixed bag for a lot of industries, right? Some industries will benefit greatly by these tariffs,
Yeah.
where they were getting killed by foreign competition. Others are going to have some issues for a
Foreign
while.
competition operating on deals we made. They're
Right.
advantaged by deals we made. That's what Trump is saying. We're not making deals that screw our own people anymore. And where we find them, we're eliminating.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know, why do car parts have to travel like 26 times between the borders? Our
Right.
borders to, and then, depending, I guess, and then I guess they can be stamped American depending upon where the final, assembly was done or whatever. Because that's always been that little trick of the game too, right? For Buy American, is that you do the final assembly in the U.S., even though a lot of the product itself was actually forged and made elsewhere, and that you get that Buy American. Remember ABC News for years? I don't even know if they're still doing it. They used to have a frequent Buy American segment, and they'd go around, they'd find factories and places in the U.S. which were, everything was from start to finish was made in America. But those are hard to find. There are not a ton of them, but this is kind of opening up and saying, you know, why can't we have more industries here? We've lost so much of our industrial base over the years, and
Yeah.
just
And it's
giving
like,
it away.
like apparently Canada, I didn't get the chance to read the whole thing, but it looks like Canada has caved on all its tariffs to the US. So like we have all those, the top 100, we've talked about this before, the top 100 miles of the country, right? The northernmost 100 miles, all across the country, east to west, is largely dairy, poultry, eggs, things you can do where you have to be out tending the crops for a long time because it's cold growing seasons, blah, blah, blah. So, Canada has, you can sell a little bit at normal tariffs, but if you go over the little bit, you get to like 275% tariffs, right? So, so they've effectively, and they come out and say, we've never even reached that limit. Well, of course not. No one's going to say, yeah, let's go sell stuff in Canada with 275% tariff on it, right? This milk costs $22 and this one costs $3. You're not going to, that's pointless to do. So, all that's, if that all goes away, that's a dramatic expansion of economic activity in parts of the country that I'll just say badly need it. Upstate New York, the upper part of New England, which is in a lot of economic malaise, top of Michigan, Minnesota, the whole state of Minnesota is involved in this industry, the Dakotas, Montana, even. So, you want, they just leveled the playing field for, a huge cross section of the country with one fell swoop. So if Canada's going to do that and stick with it.
So here's another thing out of curiosity, because I mean, the tariffs have definitely got an effect on things. So say we're able to eliminate tariffs, or at least get some reciprocity where we're not running these huge trade deficits with other countries, so we get the level playing field. What's your opinion about the subsidies that we give as taxpayers to various industries, or businesses, from the farmers to whatever, that prop up a lot of things? Is there a world where those types of things go away? Is that something that Doge would like to see kind of go away in a sense?
Doge has looked at USDA and they have made some pretty significant recommendations along those lines. I mean, the subsidy program is like anything else. Even if you agree with its ideas, it's been thoroughly corrupted at this point and has to be reformed. Moving around money from taxpayers to farmers, and I think one of the things, you're going to have a lot of people that get caught in the crossfire of this. So probably in the short term, Trump will have to do what he did last time and sort of monitor for who gets screwed for the worst and come in and help them a little.
Yeah. So
but I mean, you're talking about like all the stuff we got out of China the last time, and he gave like 16 billion to the farmers. And I hate to say it, but 16 billion ain't a lot of money around here.
Not with an almost $7 trillion budget.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it is a drop in the bucket for all.
It's a drop in the bucket. It sets everything right, and it lets him do some stuff that gets gains that far outstrip 16 billion.
Yeah, I wanted to go back. I meant to put this into our international part of it too. Is that as we were talking about when you were talking about we got to the parliamentary system too. The other thing that was happening too was this whole issue about Marine Le Pen. And now she's banned from running for office, and she can appeal this, I guess, this conviction or whatever. But the process, the courts move slowly. Yeah,
they're really going to move slowly on her.
But part of the problem is that her party is like the largest bloc in Parliament, right?
That's right.
So
she was going to win. She was ahead. She was going to win. It was going to be by amount.
Because Macron can't run again, so she was going to be the lead candidate. So that there's no clear leader within her party really to do that. And once again, it also is that parliamentary system where they were kind of in control. Because she had the largest bloc, but she had the largest bloc. They weren't the majority. They still had to cobble together various factions in order to have the government run as the government does. So this is that fractiousness of the parliamentary system. Is just that as you said, they're not voting for the top leader. They're voting for these party people who then have to figure out how to form a government in order to make and then pick the leader who will run the government.
All done by poobahs, all done by politicians. Self-interested, trying to protect their own hindsides and all that kind of stuff.
Right. I mean, and look, I mean, you look at what happened in the UK. How many conservative prime ministers that they had to go through because of just all the turmoil that they were going through. It's like the voters had really no say on that.
Right.
They were just switching them out. Trying to figure this out. I mean, I think Japan has had the same problem over time. They've also switched out people and things like that. So these parliamentary systems. I mean, South Korea is kind of in distress because the problem with their president and all of this. And the president has like one term and that's it. And so the knives are already out from the time you're elected, particularly when you're on the more conservative side of the ledger. On that. So it's they try to throw him out, bring somebody else in, then try to throw him out, and it just creates a huge mess. And like who's running the country, who's making the decisions to move your country forward, and all of this. So at least for those who think Trump is just chaotic and all the other nasty things whatever nasty things they've said about him. It's just like, look, our system works, okay? It's our people, voters voted for Trump, right? Popular vote, electoral college vote, he got it. So, that's it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. I still don't like the parliamentary system. I don't care who's in control.
Yeah. I mean, it's failing all these countries, and it allows bureaucrats to run things. Right. It allows people who are not responsive to the people. The thing about it is they're getting to the point where you better start being responsive. That's what's going on here, is that, that's why Trump won. He's responsive. The people say this thing is corrupt and it's bloated and it's not effective. And Trump went in and he said, I'm going to root it out, fire everybody, go through all their computers and find out what they're cheating, right? Well, that's what he's doing, right? I'm going to close the border. We're not going to just, we can't really do that. Yeah, I can. Watch me, And so, I mean, that's why he won. He actually follows through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, those of us that paid, attention to politics and things like that and have been a large part of our lives for a long time, we knew that there was waste and inefficiency in government. And, and Elon is
and that it was big, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
We had no idea how big it really was.
Yeah. I mean, no one had been able to actually go through in there and do that, and I've mentioned before. I mean, we've talked about, Tom Schatz with Citizens Against Government Waste, talked about Tom Coburn when he was in office, and he would make a pronouncement every year and list a bunch of things, but which was all well and fine, but nothing happened.
Right.
Something's happening. It is. I know it's chaotic, and I was thinking with this FDA thing when I woke up the other day and saw what was happening with with all the HHS, FDA things like that. I have a couple of friends of mine that work for the FDA, and I thought, I wonder if they still have a job, because I don't. It's not clear, from any news reports as exactly what group of people are getting laid off and all of this. But it also just once again, the expansive size of government, and just something had to be done. Okay. And I thought, is it really necessary for us to study all of these things? Italy.
Right.
Yeah. Italy is totally chaotic.
Yeah. That's right. It has let he be a pretty good president if they'd let her do the job.
Yeah. I mean, but I don't know. Silvio Berlusconi will live on in infamy.
Yeah, that's how you run that country, though, right?
Yeah,
you don't worry about ethics or nothing like that. You just go in. But that's the kind of power that an executive gets in a parliamentary system, because no one's really in charge.
Right, and they build immense wealth. Right.
Yeah,
they build immense.
How does that happen?
Yeah, how? I don't know.
It's like our guys too, right? That's another thing that's starting to get looked at. It's like, how do you go to Congress and $174,000 a year, and you got to maintain a home in the district and a home in DC, and yet you come out of it worth $29 million. Now, how did that happen? Where did that money come from?
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know. It's like, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or whatever. It's like, but while you're in office, why are you writing books?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, that whole Chuck Schumer thing where his book tour imploded because of, his traitorous, behavior, and everything like that. So I'm like, this just reminds me. It's like, I've seen so many, how members of the House and Senate write books while they're still in office. Is like, shouldn't you be doing that after you leave office?
Yeah,
not while you're
right.
in
And
office.
you work for us, right?
Yeah.
You're at the point where am I always on the clock? Well, no, you're not always on the clock, but you need to be able to justify it if you're not on the clock. And writing a book does not happen instantly. It takes a lot of time.
That's a long process.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have that. You go through a lot to write a book. So I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's
a full-time job. You don't need sidelines.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad I get some backup.
Same thing with these people that want to vote remotely because they got little kids. Don't stand for office if you're going to make excuses why you can't show up. You got to show up. That's part of the job. Sorry. And that if you allow them to do that, right, there's going to be excuses and tomfoolery of every type imaginable. Let's just keep that.
And I think that's what the Speaker Johnson is trying to say, is that that's a can of worms for them. It's like, it's not that we're unsympathetic to you and your baby and whatever and your family concerns, but once you open that whole thing up, the excuses multiply.
Right.
That is human nature. That always happens with these types of things. So I understand his reluctance to go down that road. But in the meantime, was it her name, Polino? I mean, she's frozen Congress with her maneuvers. She managed to get the discharge petition and everything else, and they can't bring up anything unless they include her proposal, her bill into what they want to do. I guess there's probably a way they'll figure it out to try to make her somewhat happy so they can move forward again. Then again, Congress not doing anything for a little while is probably not the worst thing in the
Not the worst
world.
thing either. Anna Paulina Luna.
Yeah, Anna Paulina Luna. That's it. Yeah. So it's we'll have to. I don't know. It was interesting to see it coming from a Republican, and she went to the Democrats. So it tells you a little bit where she was thinking to try to go get her support base. And the Republicans, by and large, were not going to support her on this. She needed the Democrats to push this over the top. So so much for that. Keep an eye on that woman.
Yeah, that's right.
Trump may be keeping an eye on her too, as well.
Yeah.
So we also had, we had special elections in Florida. Republicans were a little nervous, about it, and the results were, they were slightly weaker than what Matt Gaetz and Walz had done in their elections.
But they're both known quantities. Trump was on the ballot. It was a low turnout, off time election.
I mean, they still won with a good majority of the vote. I don't see that as a big problem for them. I don't see that as sending a signal of any weakness of any kind.
Right.
And even the whole Supreme Court justice thing in Wisconsin, that race, I wasn't surprised by the outcome of that. I know Elon poured a lot of money into it. I was.
So did Soros. Soros put in more than
Elon. Right. So there was a ton of money in that race.
Yeah, there was a ton of money in that race, and there are more Democrats in Wisconsin than there are Republicans. There just are. There always have been, and we've cut down the margin some, but it's still there. And the other thing about that one is that is a pretty suspicious result, right? Because at the same time, they had an election on whether to enshrine in the state constitution a voter ID requirement, and it passed overwhelmingly. Now, that ring to you as a Republican issue, right? If it wins, that should indicate strength for Republicans. So how are we so strong, and much stronger, by the way? I don't want to say that. How are we so strong on voter ID and elect this lady? And also, I guess they're saying, ballots showed up late and all that kind of stuff. So, this may be one where you go check it out, because, state well known for corrupt elections, and those results are kind of hard to reckon, to me. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, how can one carry over?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, they're going in different directions. That's an interesting point. I don't know that they're going to do anything about it. I mean, Schimmel, he conceded. I don't think he's going to have a look to it. I mean, if one of the voter integrity groups wants to take a look at that or whatever,
or Bondi's DOJ election corruption unit.
Yeah, right? I mean,
they haven't been brought out of the box yet.
Right, that's fine for them to look at it and to see whether or not there were any real irregularities. Yeah, but anytime you vote for voter ID and you're just like, oh my gosh, the Democrats have got to be going nuts.
Yeah, that's right.
Now somebody's posting some I don't know. This is Tesla. I'm not sure I want to look at that link. I think I'm going to let that one lie. That's popped up there in the chat. So there was also the story about Trump. He didn't put the hammer down on a third term, which I chuckle at this.
I think he's keeping the D's on their toes.
Is that like ultimate trolling?
Yeah, and he keeps down the infighting over who will succeed him. Right? You can't really talk about Vance or DeSantis or whoever if Trump's still talking about running.
Yeah. So I just I
don't know that there's a legal basis. He seems to think that there is some way of arguing this legally where you would win. I don't know if that exists, but it'd be I don't think it'll ever come up either. I think that, the thing you got to remember is like Trump's 78, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
He gets done with his term. He's 82. You want to sign up for 4 years of hard work at age 82? Maybe, but I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think this is why he's, as I said, he's kind of blown the whole wad now, because I think he sees this as his now or never time. He's got 4 years. Let's go for broke. Let's just do it and lay it all out there. A third term, what's the encore there at that point in time? He's trying to prep JD or somebody, to be the heir and continue the policies and get a younger person hopefully to take over, and and then keep things going for a while. There's just not a lot of benefit, and once again, you want to challenge, Constitution, challenge these amendments, because I guess it says, president cannot serve more than 2 terms. Now, it doesn't say, you couldn't serve a third term if it was non-consecutive, type of a thing, in the sense of like he's had the 1 and he gets 2 consecutive. Well, okay, you could, but that's a real stretch.
Yeah.
With everything. And the news that came in this morning as we wrap up here. So Eric Adams, so the judges dismissed a criminal case against him. And now he's announced that he's leaving the Democratic Party, and he's going to run as an independent, which means that he will skip the Democratic primary in New York for mayor, for re-election. I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know that, if he, by running as an independent, I don't know.
Well, now my understanding was he was trying to form another political party. The representative of this new party.
Okay. Well, the news report I saw was that he was going to run as an independent and skip the Democratic Party, primary.
He is skipping the Democrats.
Yeah, but if you do that, if that means you're going to have a potential 3-way race, if they're
That's good for him, I would think.
Does that how does that stack up? I mean, what are Cuomo's chances? I don't know. There's a lot of people that are jumping in on this thing,
right?
Too.
So you're going to airlift someone who represents the troubled past of New York, right, to be the Democrat. Because I mean, who are their choices? Little Cuomo, he's definitely tied to the ugly past. What's her name? Teacher. What's her name? I can't remember her first name.
Oh yeah, I know.
Starts with a P. Weird name that starts with a P. Like people like that will jump in. Maybe Letitia James. So then like everything you hated about Biden, here it is again. These are your choices. Versus somebody who will attempt to be a conservative, right, of some sort, some description, right? Try your best against perhaps even little young Giuliani, right? And then you'll have Adams, who's known quantity, who threw his political career away to try to save New York. So, one guy that you can't argue his principles, because his principles have been out there for everyone to see. So I'm thinking that, that he's in pretty good shape if you end up in a 3-person race.
Yeah, that'll be that just adds another level of intrigue to the whole.
Yeah, makes it fun.
All right, let's wrap it up, Brian.
Okay, let's see. I wanted to see what was on the list before I go away. Let's see what's on the list. Stefanik, feel bad for her. So she was going to be UN ambassador, but they decided that they're getting a little close in the House, keeping the majority in the House. So they asked her to stay in the House. Perhaps after the 2026 election, they could do something about that. Sure, soar then crash. I don't know about that. Hooters filing for Chapter 11. That's been coming. Those kind of restaurants are they're all in trouble. Fridays, Chili's. I mean, I guess they're not quite like Hooters. Hooters has got a slightly different thing that draws them. But the sit down, the suburban, chain restaurant is in big trouble in America. Torpedo bats. That's going to be interesting to see what happens there. My first thought was, they hit all these home runs off the Brewers, right? Then the Brewers left and they went to Kansas City, and Kansas City beat them like 11-0 the first day. So it's possible that the Brewers just can't pitch very well. But now it does look like, there's some truth about the torpedo bats, and they're legal. And, there's been a long time since something happened that really improved the leverage of the hitter in the pitcher versus hitter battles. It's been pretty much constantly pro pitcher for a long time now. So, if it breaks that up, it's probably good for the game.
Yeah, that whole thing has been interesting because, as you said, because my first reaction was like after those first couple of games is like, because they crushed the Brewers. It's like, no, I think this says more about the Brewers pitching than the Yankees hitting.
But the last 2 days they gave up 1 run and 0 runs. So
yeah,
they have kind of found their footing, the Brewers.
Yeah, and then I can't remember who it was. I heard it this morning. I completely forgot who it was, but they had quoted. So there was one ball player who'd taken this, and it wasn't a Yankee. It was one of the other teams, and so he was trying out the bats, and he used it for a couple at bats, and then he went back to his bat. So this is not like this panacea for somebody. Oh, good. If I do this, I turn into this
30 homer
this 50 home run hitter.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
Oh, yeah. Even Bob is sounding in on this.
Yeah. Woo.
He hits enough home runs.
No married men on the infield if he gets one.
He's like, Ohtani can hit enough home runs. It's just kind of like Aaron Judge. They can hit enough home runs without any other kind of bat, I think.
That's right.
And it's also, I think, everything else everything's different. I mean, every ball player, your the structure of your body, your all of these, there's so many factors that goes into all of these things. So
like a batting stance is like a thumbprint. Like we all have our own.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we go. Talking baseball at the end. Love it. It's a great time of the year. Anyway, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please, as always, stay safe and stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And as always, God bless America, and we will see you again next week. Enjoy.